Yesterday was Marvel Studios' first Hall H San Diego Comic-Con panel since 2019, and Kevin Feige absolutely brought his A game. Not only did he announce all of Phase 5, but he also gave us the start and end points of Phase 6, and there were some massive announcements in there. So let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I started this channel because I was driving everyone around me crazy talking about movies and TV way too much. If you can relate, you're probably in the right place and consider clicking that subscribe button. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Let me know, what did you think about Kevin Feige's massive plans for the next couple phases of the MCU, and in particular, which announced project are you most excited for? With that said, I'm just gonna basically walk through all the stuff that they announced, kind of that bird's eye view of what we can expect from the MCU over the next 3 years, and let's get started. Kicking things off, he announced that phases 4 through 6 are the Multiverse Saga. In the same way that phases 1 through 3 were the Infinity Saga with Thanos as the big bad, phases 4 through 6 are the Multiverse Saga with presumably Kang as our big bad for this section of the MCU. Now, in the season finale of Loki, a character appeared, He Who Remains, who is kind of in control of the timeline, and with the events of that episode, he's booted from that role, and he said that there's other versions of him that are much worse, much more dangerous, and some of them like to conquer. And this character that we saw in that episode is a variant of Kang, who will be this big bad and this important presence all throughout the next few phases of the MCU. He will appear as one of the villains in Ant-Man and the Wasp 3 coming out in just a few months. And then as we move into Phase 6, he's even got some other appearances in the titles of certain films, which we will get to as we walk through the timeline of coming things. But the key idea here is that this is all about the multiverse, this section right here, and it's building towards an epic multiverse war at the end of Phase 6. Other thing to know about Kang the Conqueror, he's a time-traveling villain who in the comics is frequently opposed to the Fantastic Four and the Avengers, so makes sense that you would bring him into the MCU at this point in time where the Fantastic Four are about to show up, and we got more Avengers projects coming in the near future. But we'll talk about that in Phase 6. Next up, the end of Phase 4 is near. In fact, She-Hulk and Black Panther Wakanda Forever are the final 2 projects of Phase 4 of the MCU. Basically, he kicked off the panel, he says, the end for Phase 4 is here. It's She-Hulk and Black Panther Wakanda Forever. And that means we start next year with Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania as the kickoff of Phase 5 of the MCU, which as soon as he said that was a big surprise for me, because normally these phases are longer than this, but if you stop and think about it, they're putting out much more content now, so Phase 4 is by far the largest phase of the MCU, even though it's also the shortest in duration under which the content has been released, because they've added streaming into the mix, so they're putting out twice as many projects every single year, and the streaming projects are twice as long as movies, so the watch time or the amount of actual content is like the total amount of phases 1 through 3 has already been released inside of Phase 4 of the MCU. Now, a little bit of kind of quick commentary on my part. With them officially announcing Phase 4 ends with Black Panther Wakanda Forever, it's kind of solidified for me that Phase 4 is easily the most unfocused of the phases, that just feels like they're trying a bunch of different things, starting a bunch of new characters, starting a bunch of new plot threads, but it's by far the least cohesive of the phases. And I think some of that is because simply they're trying to do such a big story in phases 4 and 5 that you have to have multiple fronts kind of going, that you're building towards all this stuff in a bunch of different areas to pull it all together 3 years from now. So inherently, right now it feels unfocused because it's starting all this different stuff. I think the other side to it, though, is that with Disney Plus, almost certainly the higher ups mandated that Marvel needed to put out a certain amount of content. And because of that, they're putting out a lot more stuff than actually fits into their master plan. It's a lot more about quantity than necessarily just quality at this point in time. That's not to say there haven't been good things, but I think in general, there have been a lot more kind of mid to lower tier MCU projects throughout Phase 4. And that's what happens when you're told you have to put out this much content in a specific point in time. And so I think some of it's just there's projects they have to do because they were told they had to do it. So here's a fun character. We'll just kind of tell this story about it. And it feels a little bit to me like we've got a bunch of pieces out there, but they're not all to the same puzzle. And typically, previous 3 phases, you could see how all the pieces fit to the puzzle. A bunch of these pieces now don't feel like they fit. And so I felt kind of, especially the last few months, felt kind of lost and directionless. Where after Loki, it was like, okay, we're doing multiverse. And then we did Spider-Man No Way Home. That was multiverse. And then we see Moon Knight, and it's like, how does all these Egyptian gods play into it? I don't really understand. And then we got Miss Marvel, and I don't know, how does this fit into it? And then we do Thor, Love, and Thunder. How does this fit into everything? And She-Hulk's next, and then Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. How do these fit into this multiverse? I don't get it. And what was going on with Elaine Bennis back with, she's recruiting people last year, but nothing this year? That, to me, is a bit of why Phase 4 feels kind of unfocused. And now that we're seeing it's coming to an end, unless something magical happens with She-Hulk and Black Panther 2, I'm feeling Phase 4 is going to be a bit of a letdown for me as a whole. And that'll bring us to Phase 5. And pretty quickly, as soon as this panel started, Kevin Feige just started to map out and showed us this graph of what Phase 5 will look like. And essentially it spans from the beginning of 2023 until summer of 2024. It's only a year and a half long. So a very short phase, but there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. So it kicks off, and we're just going to walk through each of these in release order. Kicks off with Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. And they also released a first early poster for the movie. And you've got Kang's face right there on the poster. And then throughout the panel, they discussed also that MODOK is a villain inside of this film. So I don't know exactly how this ties into their grander scheme. For the people in the room in Hall H, they played a trailer for Ant-Man Quantumania. They didn't release that to the public, so I haven't seen any of it. I wasn't in the room, but I saw some quotes on Twitter where apparently the introduction of Ant-Man to Kang, Ant-Man goes, "Hey, I'm Ant-Man, I'm an Avenger," and Kang goes, "I'm a conqueror." And so Kang apparently is prominent in this, revealed as this time-traveling conqueror, but they also mentioned there's another villain in the mix, and it's fascinating to me that Ant-Man franchise has typically been kind of intentionally a smaller scale, an ant-sized in scope addition to the MCU. They're meant to be kind of these light-hearted films that are easy to digest, that frequently come right after big event films, Avenger films that are heavy, and then you get a nice, simple, unassuming Ant-Man film. So it's fascinating to me that an Ant-Man film is kicking off a new phase, and we're putting in the big bad really for the first time. We saw a variant of him that's not the big bad in Loki, but our introduction to him as the Conqueror is in an Ant-Man film. Thus just like, you know, somewhat the brilliance of Kevin Feige. Typically, Ant-Man films haven't been the strongest performers at the box office. They haven't been as exciting for most people. So let's take the big bad and make this movie a big event. Kevin Feige, you are a genius. Moving right along, next thing up will be a Disney Plus series, Secret Invasion. And this is a comic storyline basically about the Skrull, the shapeshifters from Captain Marvel, coming to the Earth and having a secret invasion of the Earth. I believe once again in Hall H, they showed some additional footage of this. For us in the general public, all we've seen is like this one second shot of Nick Fury looking older, but they haven't released too much publicly about this. So our knowledge is basically from the comics, and it seems like they're trying to do the Skrull invasion plotline. So that's a fairly good point of reference for what it will be like. But as for the general public, we have limited specific information about how they're adapting it. Then we have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and this is a fascinating one to me for the most obvious reason that it was supposed to come out like a couple years ago. It was supposed to come out already. And obviously James Gunn was fired over tweets from 10 years ago, and then they rehired him months later. But by the time they rehired him, he'd taken a job over at DC and he did the Suicide Squad. And so then they had to delay this movie a long time in order to fit into that. And I suspect that shifted their exact plans for the teaming up of Thor with the Guardians of the Galaxy. And so it made for the beginning of Thor Love and Thunder to be a little bit strange and different. So all of that is fascinating to me because this is one of these pieces that just had to be moved around a whole bunch. This is another one. They showed a trailer in Hall H. Apparently, Flaming Lips' Do You Realize was playing over it. People said they were crying while watching this trailer because it was just so emotionally resonant. Gamora is tied in with the Avengers, and there was flashbacks about Rocket when he was younger. And so apparently just has a lot of emotion in this trailer that they showed. But Kevin Feige said they do not plan on releasing that footage to the public. There will be a different trailer that we will eventually see. But so I'm fascinated by this one because I love the original Guardians of the Galaxy. Guardians 2, one of my most disappointing films in the entire MCU, but not in a way that made me turned off to James Gunn or skeptical of James Gunn. Just that what he did there, when I don't think that worked, but I'm still just as excited for Volume 3 as I was for Volume 2, because James Gunn's a weird, interesting guy that he takes risks, and sometimes they pay off for people, sometimes they don't. That risk didn't pay off for me, but it wasn't in a way that actually made me cynical towards the franchise. I still want to see more with these characters. Next thing we got lined up, summer 2023, we have Echo as a Disney Plus series. This is a continuation of the character that was introduced on Hawkeye. Apparently also Kingpin will be returning. Kingpin and Echo are heavily tied together in the comic run, and I don't want to spoil too much of Hawkeye in case you didn't see it, but something involving her and Kingpin happens that had a lot of people not very happy, but it has ties to the comics, so a bunch of us were like, I'm pretty sure he's coming back in the Echo series, and that has essentially been confirmed. Several other people from Marvel Netflix are rumored to appear in this show, which sounds very cool to me. I don't really know much about Echo in general, so this isn't one that's like particularly all that exciting for me, because it's like, okay, she was fine as a side character on Hawkeye. I don't know that I specifically need her to be the lead, but whatever. Next thing we have on there, another Disney Plus show, Loki Season 2. The thing about this one that's interesting is how is it going to tie into this multiverse mythology? Because Loki Season 1 set the whole thing in motion by breaking the idea of a sacred timeline. So then in the 2 years between them, we're going to have a bunch of different other multiverse projects. Kang shows up in Ant-Man 3. So what is Loki Season 2? How does that tie into this grander mythology and everything? I'm fascinated by it. I enjoyed Season 1. It was an interesting little adventure, and where do you go from there? I just have no idea in light of all the other stuff. Then we have a movie, The Marvels, which is a sequel to Captain Marvel, WandaVision, and Miss Marvel all at the same time. And with where the post-credit scene of Miss Marvel, what happens in it, I don't even know how to interpret what happened there, but it is absolutely a tease for this movie, but I don't have any clue what it means or how I was supposed to interpret what I saw there. So I have no idea where this one is going. Obviously, Captain Marvel typically is not one of the better received MCU films. Miss Marvel wasn't super watched, but the people that did watch it seemed to like it a good bit. Maybe thought it got lost a little bit in the midsection. I didn't think it had the best focus, but generally speaking, people thought it was better than a lot of us expected it to be. I have no idea what this movie will be like, though, and how it will tie into this grander scheme of things that they're teasing. Then we have Blade, Another one, I have no idea how it ties into the multiverse or everything else that they're building up, but Blade finally coming out. They announced this was happening 3 years ago. Now we have a definitive release date. And as someone that saw all 3 of the original Blade films in the theater when they originally aired, that have always been a fan of those films, and then someone that loves the MCU, can't wait to see how Blade ties into this MCU-ified version of the character. What that means, who's he going to be like? And I guess one of the post-credit scenes in Eternals was Kit Harington being drawn towards his role as Black Knight, and then there's a voice calling to him, and that was Blade. Like, I didn't pick up on it in the theater. I found that out on the internet. Wait, oh, that was Blade? That was actually our first introduction to Blade, was in Eternals? Oh, cool. So does that mean that Kit Harington is going to show up in Blade? I don't know. I'd be excited to see it. Next up, we have a Disney Plus series, Ironheart. And this is about, I guess, a girl who's inspired by the work of Iron Man, Tony Stark, who creates her own Iron Man suit, essentially, and in a sense continues that legacy. I have not read the Ironheart comics, but it is a person in a metal suit continuation in the MCU. Can't comment too much on it. In general, it's a little bit frustrating to me that we took all of our original Avengers, and through phases 4 and 5, we're going to do a gender swapped version of them. In some sense, obviously, the different ways, different senses, different lengths of time, but it just feels a little bit lazy to me. So it's tough for me to get specifically excited about the last in that line of gender swapped original Avengers, but I haven't read the material. I don't know if the character's awesome. I'm not going in cynical. I love to be won over on a basic idea. If you just take all of our original Avengers except for Black Widow and just gender swap them, do the girl version of them in some sense, it feels lazy. And that's where kind of going back to it feels a little bit like there's Disney mandated they have to put out a certain number of projects for Disney Plus, and therefore we just have to find things. And so all of a sudden you're greenlighting a lot of things. What's the easiest way to come up with ideas to greenlight things? What's the girl version of each of our heroes? And then what are the ones we actually want to do? Perhaps that's a cynical take on it. I certainly have some cynicism in my take on what Disney's doing. I don't go into these projects specifically cynical. I want to go in and love them. I have this career. You're listening to me right now because of the MCU. It changed the trajectory of my life. It doesn't mean there aren't things taking place with Disney that don't make me go, this looks suspicious. Speaking of things that seem suspicious and possibly quantity over quality, next up we have Agatha, Coven of Chaos. This is a spinoff from WandaVision with the Agatha character that, as a side character on WandaVision, a lot of fun. Kind of a nice little addition. Then they announced they're doing a spinoff, which at first was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then you stop and think about it and go, is that interesting? What? I mean, I'm fine with seeing more of the character, but as a lead of her own show, what are we doing here? Why are we giving Agatha her own show? I don't think I fully understand why this is a thing that resources are going towards. If you've been following some of the news surrounding the bad buzz surrounding the MCU over the last month, a big piece of it was like some VFX artists have said they dropped out of the VFX industry because of Marvel because they're such a bad client that they demand outrageous deadlines and they want you to make 6 versions and then they pick one very last minute to go with, and you have to. They're a terrible client because they're putting out so much content in a very short window of time. And I feel like you can see that in some of the movies where there's some shots in Thor: Love and Thunder, a movie that cost $250 million, and you're like, it looks like they just I feel like I could Photoshop better a helmet onto Natalie Portman than that. And why are we Photoshopping on a helmet onto, why is it a CGI helmet on Natalie Portman? Why don't you put a helmet on her? There's these shots that just look terrible. There's all sorts of comparison images out there on Twitter and other places showing some really bad shots in these movies. Pretty much everything with John Krasinski in Multiverse of Madness looks really bad. Clearly, he was there in a warehouse in front of green screens talking to tennis balls, giving a weird performance. Why do I say all that talking about Agatha? Because this show is pulling resources away from things that feel more important. That's why. To make that show happen, to have it written, to have Kevin Feige overseeing it, to have a VFX artist do the VFX for it. Those are resources. That is time that's not going to other stuff. Next on here, however, things that made me very happy yesterday. They announced Daredevil Born Again, an 18-episode Disney Plus show. Now, there's a ton to unpack here for me personally, but Daredevil was probably my favorite TV show of the last decade. I love Daredevil, and my heart was ripped out of my chest when they canceled it after season 3, because season 3 was awesome. And then out of the blue, they cancel the entire Marvel Netflix universe and all the shows. Gut-wrenching. So jump forward. We're getting another season. Charlie Cox is returning. Vincent D'Onofrio returning as Kingpin. Hopefully everyone else is returning as well. Born Again is one of the classic runs in the comics. There's a bunch in that sounds awesome. And even more importantly, it's 18 episodes. The big, gigantic problem with the majority of the Disney Plus shows up to this point in time is the 6-episode run feels the wrong compromise between a 2-hour movie and a normal length season of television, whether that's 10 episodes, 20 episodes. It's not long enough to feel like a TV show and be developed out like a TV show, and it's not short enough to feel like it moves at a brisk enough pace. So it just feels like a movie with a bunch of filler thrown into it. Or they throw a bunch of stuff in there in the middle, and then they rush the finale. A bunch of the shows have felt like that for me. And this is going to be 18 episodes, which feels like, well, obviously, that's longer than the seasons from Netflix. So it's almost like you almost give me too much, but it's 3 times as long as their normal seasons with Daredevil. So much awesome and all that. I do have some concerns because the tone of Marvel Netflix and MCU proper, quite different. Marvel Netflix was made for adults. It's like light R, hard PG-13. It's in that window. And MCU is, generally speaking, made for whole families. So I'm a little bit concerned. Are we going to capture the tone, the magic of that original run? But man, they're doing it, and they're doing it right with a long run. I cannot wait. Next, an announcement on here, Captain America, New World Order. And this will be Sam Wilson as Captain America. It's a continuation of the Captain America series, but it's also a continuation of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier TV series. The writers of that TV series are continuing on, and it's the director of Cloverfield Paradox. If I'm being honest with you, this one has me really nervous because the writers did not win me over with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and the director did not win me over with Cloverfield Paradox. So that just has me very nervous about this film. If you just announced this after Endgame, I'd be like, awesome, cool, a nice continuation. Sure, absolutely. Put Sam Wilson, absolutely cool, awesome. The thing that makes me nervous, though, is Falcon and the Winter Soldier was one of the biggest duds for me in the entire MCU. So taking that as our springboard for this movie makes me go, ooh, I'm not as crazy about that as I thought I would be. That is not what I was hoping this would look like. But all we have as at the moment is a title and some people behind the scenes. I'd love to be won over. I'm nervous at the moment. To put it in simple terms, essentially it's Marvel's version of the Suicide Squad. So a set of less traditional heroes, reformed villains, recruited by the government for the purpose of going on missions. It's not exactly one for one the same thing, but it's the same ballpark as Suicide Squad. Name coming from Thunderbolt Ross, this character, very not prominent, but has made many appearances throughout the MCU up to this point in time. And what if he had a team of his own people that did his bidding? So you think, what's all this stuff going on with Elaine Benes Valentina in Black Widow and Falcon and the Winter Soldier recruiting people? What's all that about? Probably Thunderbolts. And so Baron Zemo, U.S. Agent, Taskmaster, these are all characters that are prime examples of people that could be in this team-up movie. I would assume Yelena will probably show back up in this one, but it's a different type of team-up movie than simply doing another Avengers film. So this one to me actually has me quite excited because it's just different enough while being that team-up energy that I love. So this one seems pretty cool. I'm fascinated by the fact that this is our culmination of Phase 5. Closing it out is with the team up of anti-heroes, reformed villains, forced villains, whatever that's going to be. That's fascinating to me, but also a fun way to close something out too. And that will bring us to Phase 6, which is from the end of 2024 until the end of 2025. And Feige didn't fill in all the blanks here. He only gave us 3 stops along the way, and they are 3 big stops. First one up, Phase 6 kicks off with Fantastic Four. Now, we knew that MCU gained control of the Fantastic Four with the Fox acquisition back in 2019. He said they were coming back in 2019 at the Comic-Con panel back then. And then John Watts, director of this last trilogy of Spider-Man movies, was lined up to direct Fantastic Four for a year and a half, and then he dropped out. He's doing a Star Wars show instead. And as of right now, we don't know who's directing it, writing it, starring it. We don't have any official announcements. And we saw, of course, Mr. Fantastic in the Illuminati in Multiverse of Madness, but that was just a variant. That's not in any way confirming the casting of John Krasinski or anything. It was just, they've openly stated they did that because that's what the fans asked for, so let's give the fans a little something. And so they did. But so we don't know too much about we don't know much of anything about this movie other than it's kicking off Phase 6. I would not be surprised at all if in a month or two, whenever D23 happens, if we found out some big gigantic information. It wouldn't surprise me at all if we get a director and cast announced at D23, whenever that is in the next couple of months. That's very exciting. Now, Fantastic Four does not have the best history when it comes to movies being made about them, but they are some of the most foundational Marvel characters that have not made it their way over into the MCU yet. And it's not that you can't make a good Fantastic Four movie. To state what many have said before, Brad Bird has made, I would say, 2 good Fantastic Four movies. They're just called The Incredibles. And they were animated, but there's plenty of room to make a good adaptation just for whatever reason. They did the Roger Corman one back in the 90s. That one was terrible because it had no budget. And then the Tim Story ones from 15-ish years ago, that they're just the genre hadn't been figured out yet. It was very early in the modern era of comic book movies that I don't think they're disasters. They're just not all that good either. And then there's 1,000 things that went wrong with the one Fan Four Stick from 7 years ago or whenever. So many things went wrong with the production of that film that it turned it into this just disaster of a film. That one is a disaster. It's an actual disaster. The production was a mess. The decisions from above were a mess. The director had a meltdown. But you give Kevin Feige, if he's not stretched too thin doing all this other stuff, doing Fantastic Four, clearly he's not rushing it. He announced it 3 years ago, and we haven't moved forward yet. He's not rushing it, so maybe we got something really cool planned for Fantastic Four. Then there's 4 projects in there, 4 dates that they've announced that they didn't announce the project yet. So they say, hey, we're gonna have more movies coming out in these dates. We're not gonna tell you what they are yet. Then we get to 2020, and that's both Disney Plus as well as movies. So you think rumors of X-Men or the Mutants, as potentially they might be called. They announced back in 2019 Armor Wars, the War Machine show, Eternals 2 potentially, Shang-Chi 2, some spinoff about Shang-Chi's sister. They registered 1,000 domain names over the last few days, and so there's a ton of rumors as to whether those are happening. But so there's a bunch of projects that could fill in these slots, or maybe a sequel season to one of the other shows. Then we get our big, gigantic announcements in 2025. Avengers, the Kang Dynasty. So we announce the first of 2 new Avengers movies coming in 2025. Kang Dynasty, assumingly this is part of another 1-2 punch like Infinity War, Endgame, but they're both in the same year. Kang Dynasty, we don't have a writer, we don't have a director, and even with everything's don't even know what this Avengers looks like yet. We're setting up something. It is a dynasty of Kang, whatever that means. That gets me excited of just like, clearly something massive goes down, interesting stuff happens. 2 more projects, and then Avengers Secret Wars. Ever since Endgame, people have gone like, what could they do to follow this up? The number one thing that people have said, Secret Wars. This goes back to comic run from the mid 80s that was like the original brand-wide crossover. This is the event where Spider-Man gets his black symbiote suit that has led to, Venom and all the excitement with that. Like, Secret Wars was the original thing. And it's happening. And I've heard some discussion of like, well, they're doing it already. It's just going to be a few years away. Sort of. It's 6 years after Endgame. So 6 years is a long time. And also, they're doubling the amount of projects they're putting out every year. And some of those are TV shows that are 3 times as long as movies. In the case of Daredevil, 9 times as long as a movie. Or is my math right on that? Yeah, 9 times as long as a movie. It's a 2-hour movie, I guess. 18 episodes. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. 8 times as long as a movie. That's a lot of time to set things up. And so we've already put in place a bunch of multiverse rules. A variant of Kang has made an appearance, and they're doing this massive 2 Avengers in the year 2025, 1-2 punch with Kang Dynasty and actually doing Secret Wars. So they have massive things planned if you could be patient and wait for it. There's a lot of people a little bit frustrated with Phase 4. There's so much content, feels a little bit unfocused. They're not as interested in certain projects. But big things are coming, and it is exciting. And you also know, if you need to do your homework, I've got a lot of homework I need to do. You know what graphic novels to go out and buy for Daredevil, Thunderbolts, Secret Wars. You know what you need to start reading to get prepped for everything that's coming. So there you have it. That is their big, gigantic plan for the next few years and some thoughts on it. Let me know, what are you most excited for? Let me know down below in the comments, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.